Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Your Boom is in the Shot. This is TJ, and we have another very special episode for you guys because we had a lot of really great responses to our Aquaman episode where we did a round table. We not only have another round table for you guys today, but we're also doing a very special Marvel week this week. So this episode you're listening to right now is the first part of two parts. This will be released, you'll be hearing this Wednesday, and then the next one will be uploaded Friday. Today we are going to be talking about the MCU up to Captain Marvel, so to the present day, and then the next part will be our review of Captain Marvel. So get really excited about that. It's the biggest week in Your Boom is in the Shots short history, and it's going to be awesome. So we're ready to kick ass and block shots. It's going to be awesome. So why don't we, without further ado, yes, welcome to our MCU Marvel-Mania Roundtable. I'm here, as is Ben, as per usual.
Yep,
but
right here.
In addition to Ben and myself, we also have three awesome friends of ours who are huge Marvel fans, just as we are, and we're really excited to talk with these guys.
Why don't we introduce the first guest on the my left? So that'd be mic number one. We have
Ode.
Woohoo! We love Ode.
Yes.
Ode's one of our friends who is a fan of the show and a student at the College of St. Rose. Next up, we have over here my buddy
William Wright Heatley. How's it going?
William Wright Heatley.
Hello.
Will's also a student technically, but he's kind of graduating at this point.
Yeah,
like he's got his time is numbered at the College of St. Rose.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But
he looks so disappointed about it.
Oh yeah, you could see my eyes are just beaming with disappointment.
Will is fun because Will is an actor and is bringing sort of an actor's lens to our table tonight.
And also a really good screenwriter.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
Oh, stop blowing yourselves horns.
Oh, whatever, man.
I could blow something else.
I'm sure you could, buddy.
All right.
Yeah, hashtag Lot182. Check it out.
Finally, we have another fan of the show. This time, not a College of St. Rose student.
Zach.
Zach, awesome. Glad to have you on the show, Zach. And it's been a pleasure meeting you so far, even though we haven't exchanged much. But let's get right into this. TJ, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, so the MCU is probably the biggest, most popular franchise in the world right now for films. It just gets watched by a crazy amount of people. They make way too much money, no matter how you look at it. They make a lot of really great movies. They make some movies that are not so great, and they make a lot of movies that are somewhere in between. But no matter what, you can't deny how popular they are. So what we're going to do today is we're going to just kind of talk about the different phases of the MCU, our general impressions, movies we liked, movies we didn't like, brief reason for why, and just general thoughts and what we're looking ahead to for the future for Endgame and beyond. Because as far as we know, the MCU is going to be pretty well shaken up looking forward. But yeah, phase one, I guess there's no really better way to start this than with Iron Man, because that really is, even though The Incredible Hulk technically came out a couple months earlier.
Well, let's be honest, that movie,
it barely connects. It connects because Thunderbolt Ross talks to Tony at the end or in the credits or whatever. It's been a while since I've seen it, but whatever. Iron Man, the first Iron Man, really is the movie that is like ground zero for the MCU. Without that movie, you don't have the rest of the MCU, and you don't have the star power of Robert Downey Jr., which the MCU is to a large extent built on. It's a really well-told story, a lot of great acting. Robert Downey Jr. is on fire in that movie. He's charismatic as hell. And that's my general impression of it.
I think I want to go on record and say that up until Black Panther, Iron Man 1 was my favorite of all of the MCU movies. Part of that is because when that movie came out, I was still a kid. I think I was in middle school. Gosh. Anyway.
Yeah, 2008. Yeah, we were in middle school at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that looking back and thinking about it, that movie kind of had everything that you'd kind of want in a successful superhero movie.
It's like the ultimate summer blockbuster. That movie. It's the ultimate popcorn flick.
Yeah, I agree. It's entertaining. It's action packed. It's beautiful. It's well written. It's not maybe the most deep movie, but it's deep enough, and it's got sort of like a moral nugget. And that I think for a long time that was my favorite movie in the MCU, and really still to this day one of the small handfuls of MCU movies that I actually like.
Ben, the Marvel hater, coming in hot already.
It breaks my heart because I love comic books and I love Marvel. The MCU breaks my heart. But let's go over to Odie. What do you think about this phase one?
I mean, we can talk all day about how Robert Downey Jr. made the MCU, but I feel like it's equally important to say, when talking about Iron Man, how the MCU made Robert Downey Jr., because he's still, at this point, sitting in hell. He hasn't done, let's be honest, he hasn't done shit since Chaplin. And you take somebody who's sitting in almost nothing and make him the foundation of something incredible. Like I'd seen, I think, the first Avengers, Guardians, maybe a few other things before I sat down and actually watched through. I watched through the MCU up to, I think, Doctor Strange in a single spring break in high school. But sitting down, just watching Iron Man as part of the MCU for the first time, you can tell that there's something more than just Iron Man or something more than just the universe they're setting up there. That is genuinely incredible, especially because of what Downey's doing at that point.
Yeah, he's a great actor and a really, really strong choice for Tony Stark.
And the gamble that Marvel took, because he was just only known as like the drug addict guy.
Yeah,
hadn't been good since the 90s at that point.
He was very much Tony Stark at that point.
I think he played Tony Stark really well. I think he had the right look, but I think, he has the cocky attitude to pull off that character really well. Not in person, mind you. From what I understand, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. is apparently a very nice guy. I don't know. I've never met him.
I'd be a pretty nice guy if I made $50 million a movie.
Yeah, but I feel like there are so many actors out there who've made that much money and are not nice and are explicitly not nice.
Yeah.
I have a little anecdote about John Cena and about how he's like apparently like a huge jerk. But that's neither here nor there.
William,
yeah. What do you think about
Iron
phase
Man?
one?
And phase one in general, if you want to talk about it.
I don't know. I think
there's also, sorry, Ben, but there's more just Iron Man. I figured we'd just jumpstart the conversation with it, but there's also most of like the initial Avengers, origin stories, the Iron Man 2, Thor, First Avenger, and then, the Avengers.
Well, for me, I kind of grew up on the first comic book movie that I ever saw in a theater was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 in 2002. That was the first time I ever saw a comic book movie in a movie theater. We had VHS tapes of Christopher Reeve's Superman and the various, adaptations of that, and they were, cheesy and whatnot. And, for the 70s, that was what it was. But for me, to see a comic book come to life as corny and campy with that type of a comic book feel, like as if it were jumping right off the page for the Raimi trilogy. That was great, minus the whole symbiote, turn into an emo, whatever. We can omit that from the conversation. But
the third one is bad, but the first two are awesome.
Yeah, and it kind of drew the for me personally, and not only as a thespian, but as a person who looks at films critically, I think that it kind of set the tone for how you should go about casting a flick, because Tobey Maguire did play Peter Parker really well in that trilogy. Not so much Spider-Man, but he had some moments, and we can get into Tom Holland in that comparison for another time. But for right now, that was the one that I grew up with, and that kind of piqued my interest. And when that trilogy ended in 2007, and Sony pulled the plug from Raimi for preventing him from making a Spider-Man 4, and the Fantastic Four adaptations weren't that popular at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen for the franchise. So for them to come out with Iron Man, and I actually saw Iron Man at the drive-in when it was first released. It was a double billing with, I don't even remember what I saw it with, but I remember liking it a lot, in part because of the action, but also because as I was older than I was when I first saw the Raimi trilogy, it told a bit of a darker story. And so to notice the difference between the themes of the really lighthearted campiness rapport of, Spider-Man and Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin to transfer to this darker tone with Robert Downey Jr. fighting terrorism, and with the weapons deal that was happening illegally, and then the whole dynamic with him, and wasn't it
Obadiah Stane?
Yeah, wasn't that Jeff Bridges who played Obadiah Stane in there? Yeah, that power dynamic too. That was an incredible thing for me to look at with a different set of eyes. That maybe if they tell a darker story, they can reach a wider audience. That it can set the tone that maybe comic books and comic book films aren't just for kids.
Yeah, so it showed that, and I look at the MCU, and again, like I said earlier, with first Iron Man especially, as like it kind of warmed us up to what superhero movies could be and what Marvel would really make them become in the coming years. And it's like that dark, more serious story. Not necessarily dark. I mean, there's dark elements, but it's serious, right? And it's adult.
Right.
But there's also fun in the action and in the humor. It doesn't all have to be cheesy, goofy, dumb stuff. And
right.
Yeah, that's a big part of what makes that movie so pivotal and like really entertaining.
It certainly set the pace. It set in motion all the films that came after, even the ones that weren't as successful in the box office or in the reviewers' minds, but at least in the sense of the formula of the MCU.
It's actually really interesting because Iron Man 1 came out the same year as The Dark Knight, which is another movie that in the superhero genre that I think is impossible to ignore.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know this is an MCU movie and The Dark Knight is DC property, but that was a dark movie. It's not just because it's called The Dark Knight, but because it is a really gritty, gruesome story. And what I think is interesting about what you were saying, Will, is that Iron Man is what set the tone, but I think The Dark Knight is a vastly better movie in a lot of ways.
Oh,
and I think what's amazing is that didn't set a tone, because every movie that we saw, that we've really seen in the superhero genre, with a few very notable but very few exceptions, they've been like Iron Man or going in the direction that Iron Man established. And I think that's an interesting thing to just kind of think about.
Yeah. But I think the difference that you have to keep in mind, too, at least in regards to the MCU versus DC, with the painting of the darker themes, is that the MCU had a wider variety of universes to go with, and so it kept it a little bit more diverse and interesting. Whereas with the DC universe, you only had a few stories to play with in the short span of time. I know that they're expanding now, but they relied heavily on whoever was going to play Batman for the next installment.
Yeah, and well, I think the problem too, the big difference, and this is again a testament to Marvel's storytelling ability in their films, is they created this template that we were just referring to, this formula. It's gotten hackneyed and generic by now, whatever, but the point is they made it, and they made it in a way that it was loose enough that it could snap to almost any character, for better or worse. But financially for them, obviously the better. Where with DC, they had this real success with the dark gritty thing behind Batman, and they tried to keep pushing that into Man of Steel. And
Dark Knight is a movie that you can't replicate. I mean,
yeah, but they tried. And
it's great, but I think
Iron
Man.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's funny because I think that's where DC really failed.
I agree.
In trying to catch the fire that they got with The Dark Knight.
With Watchmen being the only exception, in my opinion, because Watchmen was its own sort of entity within the DC universe.
But then that movie was received so well by fans that DC went, here's Zack Snyder, here's the keys to the whole franchise, right. and then it went off the rails from there. My point really in all that was that DC created a formula, tried to have a formula that didn't translate to everybody, where Marvel's formula pretty much translates to everybody to some degree of success.
Well, and what I'm saying is that you can't get a formula from The Dark Knight, whereas that's what Iron Man is so interesting. That's what's so great about Iron Man, is that rather than go the track of we're going to make good movies that are different than the comic books and that are appeal in a certain kind of way, the direction that Marvel took was that we're going to keep doing what worked really well in Iron Man, which is a really easy thing to do, because Iron Man tapped into the core of what a superhero is and what a superhero comic story is. And I think, in my opinion, and I think they appealed to both the people who loved comic books, but also the people who would have loved comic books if Iron Man issue 1 was coming out when they were a kid. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that that Marvel was smart in doing. They made a family movie that was action packed, that was that would appeal to that kid side of us that comic books originally were targeting. And in doing that, that's comic books, when you look at them, they are all very similar in that way. Like all of the, like Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, they all have a lot of similar themes because they're all part of that MCU, and they're all stylistically a little bit different. But even in their stories, there are like things that coincide and that go together. You can't do that with The Dark Knight because The Dark Knight isn't a Batman movie. It's The Dark Knight that happens to be featuring Batman as the main character.
I feel like I kind of understand where you're coming from in terms of, making a comic book fan in a way out of the movies. I think I had a single issue of a single comic when I was a kid. I never really had any much of any exposure, but I definitely, through Guardians, through the first Avengers movie, I sort of developed a love through that, as I feel like has been the case with a lot of people. I don't know if it is for anybody at the table tonight, but it's definitely, with stuff like Iron Man, just as easily, you can get into it with the inverse just as easily as you can get into it, going from comic books to movies at this point, and that's the beauty of the movie.
Yeah, well, the great thing is that the Marvel movies really do a great job of appealing to both audiences. Because, for some of the DC movies, even something that was as widely panned as Batman versus Superman, the comic book and superhero lover in me was able to appreciate it. Because I grew up just worshiping superheroes. I can't remember, any time in my life where superheroes weren't a huge element because of all the comics that I read as a kid and the cartoons that I watched and everything. So I come to it from a long history, and so there's things I can still pick out and be like, oh, I love that, but I can never take, say, my fiance who has a passing interest in superheroes. I can't take her to a DC movie. She'll fall asleep. She'll be bored to tears and she'll hate it. I could take her to pretty much any Marvel movie and she's there for it. She's excited. She's like, oh, even if it's just oh my God, there's Baby Groot. She gets excited by it.
I think it's important, not to cut you off, TJ, but I think it's important to think about the fact that I think that the MCU is a sort of natural evolution of the comic books that a lot of us had when we were kids. And I think that it was a matter of time before, instead of going out and buying every issue of a comic book, we would be waiting for every new installment of a movie. And because I think that film and cinema is really more of the younger generation's medium as opposed to print, which is an older medium. And I think just like how not every comic book is good, not every MCU movie is good, but when they are good and when they appeal to us, they get us hooked in for the long haul. And I think that's where a lot of people are with the MCU, is they're invested, and I think that's why people will stan movies so much. And I obviously am not afraid to say something that I like is bad or is doesn't deserve critical acclaim. And I think that there are a lot of MCU movies that I like that are bad. Just like there are a lot of comic books that I love that I grew up reading that are bad. and I might catch flack for that, but I think it's an important thing to understand, because it to me it's the same in both mediums. It's that this idea that I'm invested in a world, and it has titillated me and it has made me excited and happy and entertained. And I think that's why the MCU is so appealing to people, because it does that. It does that the same way that comic books did that for so many of us.
So what was your reaction then, Zach? Your first initial sort of...
Well, I mean, first of all, when I was growing up, I wasn't really into comic books or superhero kind of stuff. Anyways, I was a huge fan of Spider-Man, despite being extremely arachnophobic. But I do remember having at least one or two Spider-Man comic books as a kid, and that was pretty much the extent of it. When Iron Man came out, I may have watched it illegally online.
We don't judge here.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
But
well, only if it's me.
But I mean, my initial reaction, again, not having much knowledge about this whole universe, it was awesome. I loved it when it first came out, and I mean, it kept me invested through the whole thing. And I will say, looking back on it now, there are some things that I can point out that I don't really like about it, but still, overall, it's a great movie. And every now and then I'll go back and watch it, and keeps me just as entertained as the first time I saw it. And especially knowing what we know now with the MCU, like everybody else was saying earlier, it's in a way, it kind of makes it more enjoyable because you know what's coming, and yeah, that was my take on it.
I want to segue actually off of the theme of what's coming, because before the MCU came around, the idea of the post-credits sequence was completely novel. It wasn't used that much because the studios themselves were thinking, well, people generally don't want to stay for the long list. It's, we understand that. So we're going to end a story there. And, whenever a sequel does happen, it's just going to be advertised, and people get excited by the advertisement. So, and it wasn't, I believe, until Iron Man 1 came out, right, that it was one of the first times that they invested to see if the post-credit sequence would actually be effective in letting people know that the story will continue. Yeah. So that was another thing that I thought was completely groundbreaking.
Well, and then jumping off of that is shared universe.
Yeah.
Was also pretty much unheard of up till this point, too.
At least at that scale.
Yeah, that scale. And then since Marvel did it, now everyone had tried to do it. DC has tried to do it. Now they're since pulling back a little bit. Fox kind of tried to do it, and they're kind of like, oh, Deadpool's in the X-Men universe, but whatever. But like they're, everybody's like, oh, we got to get a piece of that shared universe action, and that's, largely thanks to Marvel and their success with it. And that's what Ben was saying, getting at earlier, is that we have characters that we have grown attached to over years and over installments and in different properties. That's why, even if Ben, who doesn't like Infinity War, can still see it and be like, oh, there's Black Panther, I like him, know, and at least he has that center point. Or my fiance can be like, oh, it's Groot, I love Groot, and so there's that stuff, and Marvel is so awesome and so unique in that element that we have that we feel like we know these characters, and it's like, when a character, say, dies, or, they cut off the franchise or whatever, we feel like we've lost somebody that we know, and it's amazing that these films can do that, because we've been with these characters for so long. If in Endgame they kill Tony Stark or they kill Cap, it's going to hurt, because we've grown to know and love those characters.
And I think, I think a big part of that is because what it seems to me, anyways, is that they don't really focus on the fact, these are fictional characters and they have superpowers. These are, at their core, human beings. They just happen to have superpowers, so they focus on the human aspect of them to try and, help us relate to something, and then they're like, oh, well, look at these other things they can do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Marvel doesn't get it. Sorry, man, but I'll hand it off to you in a second. But I think people will complain, and I know I've heard Ben complain about it before, of they don't do that enough to get into the human element of it. But compared to superhero movies that came before the MCU, it was just a lot of good guy, bad guy, stop, bad guy. Bad guy's going to destroy world. And, you never got to know the person, where now you, that Marvel, you do, at least to some extent. Some movies more than others, but you do.
With the singular exception, I think, of Spider-Man, because you have the whole struggle of being Peter Parker in addition to the struggle of being Spider-Man, because that realistically was something that people could identify with. But
you can't have a Spider-Man movie and separate Peter Parker from Spider-Man, because that's what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, is that he's Peter Parker.
It's just you also can't take the oppression out of the X-Men, and that was a huge element with Bryan Singer's X-Men.
Oh yeah.
Which is another big cutting edge superhero movie at its time.
And I will say the first X-Men movie, I liked. I mean, I remember watching it as a kid and being totally invested in that whole X-Men universe, and I think it went downhill, and it got very convoluted,
very hard.
But I to this day love X-Men dearly. I mean, X-Men and Spider-Man are my two go-tos. I like Doctor Strange, I like Iron Man, but I mean, when I think about, as a kid, what heroes kind of spoke to me. On the DC side, it was the Teen Titans and Static Shock.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the Marvel side, it was the X-Men and Spider-Man. And that was my childhood.
The Teenage Outsiders.
Yeah, well, yeah. I wonder why, but yeah, and I think it's I don't know. It's just an interesting thing.
It shouldn't be limited to just the MCU too. Going back to the point about perfect casting, because with X-Men they sorted out their shit right quick. I mean, Patrick Stewart is, in my opinion, Professor Xavier. I mean, there's just no way to get around it. And to bring in Sir Ian McKellen as Magneto, as a foil for him. I mean, these are two Shakespearean actors who worked for the Royal Shakespeare Company, who have played off of each other for years in various projects, who are in many ways ideologically apart, are complete opposite. This was a perfect casting decision.
They're the perfect old white British men for the job.
And try to imagine literally anybody else playing Wolverine besides Hugh Jackman.
It's wrong. Yeah. It's not just bad. It's not just a bad idea. It's wrong.
And even in the younger portrayals too, I think that James McAvoy came in with X-Men First Class, and that spoke volumes as being heavily invested in the character's development. And I can talk for hours about how perfect Michael Fassbender is as Magneto, and to visually see his struggle. It's just incredible.
But then on the other hand, as much as I love Sophie Turner, she's not a great Jean Grey at all.
Oh, no.
And she also can't do, like I said to Ben earlier, can't do an American accent at all.
Yeah.
I saw the Dark Phoenix trailer when I saw Captain Marvel, and I was like, ooh.
Yeah,
It could be much worse, though. The as far as fandom voters went, the top pitch for Wolverine, as far as MCU integration goes, is Keanu Reeves.
No.
He's way too old though.
Yeah.
He's
you
a little
should
bit
at least like make him like young because he's going to be in the
Jackman's
movies
way
presumably.
too old at this point, but he can pull it off.
Jackman's only like a couple years older than Keanu Reeves, or maybe like around the same age. Like,
Reeves has to do.
actually, Reeves might be a little older. They're like late 40s, early 50s by this point.
Yeah.
Reeves has to do like 5 more John Wicks before he can.
I think get a proper Matrix reboot with him back in it again. Whatever.
I think what we really need is to see the end of Wolverine, and it, at least for a long time. I think we need enough time for the Hugh Jackman generation of Wolverine to become antiquated.
Right. That was the issue with Raimi's Spider-Man. They went into the new adaptation really quick.
Or like Hellboy. Actually, that was the other trailer that I got. I did get a trailer for Hellboy too when I saw Captain Marvel. And like, I just don't feel at all ready for that. I'm like, a whole new version of Hellboy. I feel like I just saw Ron Perlman's, not that many years ago.
Iconic.
It just feels way
Golden
too
Army.
new. Yeah, it's like way too recent.
Yeah.
It's like I remember sitting at one of my father's friend's house. And we started watching Hellboy on DVD. And by the end, I was like, "Oh my god!" My first time seeing this character, like, "Oh my god, that was awesome! I love this movie." I look over at my father. He's like, "I feel like I just wasted 3 hours of my life." I'm like, what the hell are you talking about?
Not a Guillermo del Toro stan.
I love Hellboy, and we were talking about standing. I will stand Guillermo del Toro. I love Guillermo del Toro with a burning passion. Everything he puts his hands on.
Pan's Labyrinth. I tried to sit through that film and I could not.
Well, it's hard.
You're
'cause
wrong,
It's
Will.
foreign language, so sometimes it's hard to sit through like a subtitled film.
It wasn't lost in translation. I think for me, I saw it late at night. There was a lot of unanswered questions. I went into it with no expectations, and the with the exception of the Pale Man sequence, I was kind of trying to figure out what was going on with
Hey,
that.
don't feel bad, man. I'm not like crazy on Shape of Water. I'm not like a immediate
That
like
movie
Shape of
is
Water
amazing,
a
and
masterpiece.
you're
It's so
wrong.
amazing. You're so wrong. Right. Yeah. So
Is there an echo in here?
so I would like to say though, before we just get totally into a Marvel suckfest,
I'm not sucking Marvel.
Marvel has had some missteps over the years,
Oh, yeah.
and I think they learned from a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and a lot of them they learned from them in that phase 1. We had, 2 fairly, boring origin stories after Iron Man in, Captain America: The First Avenger and in Thor, and then we got the unmitigated disaster that is Iron Man 2.
Yeah.
And that movie, it was them like being like, we have to ramp up for the Avengers, and there's so much forced into that movie, and there's 2 terrible villains, not 1 but 2 terrible villains, and the whole Tony Stark character feels like it starts to fall apart for the movie. And that was a moment where, if not for the unbelievable crossover spectacle that was unprecedented, that was the Avengers, the MCU could have like fallen apart at that movie. It was that much of a misstep.
Let's not neglect the possible impact of Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 coming out back to back. I mean, to have those be the only two things you have standing at a certain point, with the exception of Iron Man, that's a disaster that was just barely avoided, but that was avoided.
I mean,
in the
there were a
best
couple
possible
years
way.
between Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2, but I mean, you also had you had the universe building at that point and the fan base growing. It's just it's a bad movie, and I wanted to, like, before we, like, as we were talking about Phase 1, before we move on to the Avengers and Phase 2, I just wanted to say that, like, Phase 1 was not perfect, but it did a great job of setting everything up and of starting the universe, but I just wanted to put it out there into the conversation that there are some missteps that Marvel had, and they should not be overlooked.
Well, and I think of the 6 movies in Phase 1, there's only 2 that are good, and that's Iron Man 1 and The Avengers.
Yeah.
The other movies in that list include The Incredible Hulk, 2008, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, The First Avenger. And I don't think any of those movies
And that's a testament, honestly, to how good Iron Man is and how good and how big the Avengers was. So the Avengers, like, we like take this crossover thing for granted now. Now that we've had 3 going on 4 Avengers movies, I guess 5 if you count Civil War, because it's basically another Avengers movie.
Basically.
And so we're like, oh, big deal. Like, Iron Man and Captain America and Thor are in the same movie and whatever, so-and-so is going to be there and blah, blah, blah. But back when Avengers came out, it was such a huge deal. Yeah, you guys, like, you have to remember, this was so unprecedented at the time to have just like that one, like, panning shot going around them of, like, in New York fighting, and you see Cap side by side with Thor, side by side with Iron Man, side by side with the Hulk and Black Widow and Hawkeye. And it was like all these characters that had never seen each other before and that had never interacted before, that were from separate worlds. They were coming together. Like, it felt like, yes, they exist in this world together. And that was such a special thing.
I was awestruck.
It really was. Like when I saw the first Avengers, I literally cried, because, like, as a comic book fan, it was like, crossovers happen a lot in comics, and they're very common. And this also gets to Men's point of, like, these movies are kind of like comics in a different medium. But it had not happened on film at that level, and it was really, I don't know, just epic. And
the only thing I can think of, and this is an awful thing to bring up, but the only comparison in my mind of in crossovers were like the Nickelodeon crossovers, like the Jimmy Neutron and
I mean,
Fairy
you
Odd
got the right
Parents.
idea there.
Hot take.
I will admit. So when the Avengers came out, I went to see it at the drive-in. It was the second movie playing that night, and it started at midnight. So unfortunately, I slept through the first Avengers when I went to see it at the drive-in, but stayed awake for and enjoyed Cars 2, if that puts an age on me at that point. So
I
the
can't
first
speak to
time I saw the Avengers, I saw it on FX, and I think the first time I saw it, at least partially, I tuned in at the moment they did the pan shot. And that alone, that alone was enough to drag me into. I went from completely anti-Marvel to Tony Stark's bitch boy in a matter of 2 years.
So did everybody, man.
Yeah,
so did the whole world. Like, that's what I was getting at earlier with, like, Robert Downey Jr. is so integral to this franchise, and the franchise, as you said, is integral to him. Again, testament to Iron Man, the first Iron Man, that character, and the Avengers.
I don't remember much. I don't remember much about the first Thor movie, but what I do remember about
There's nothing memorable about it. That's why.
well, even looking at it from a filmmaker's perspective, though, because I wasn't even thinking about the content of the storytelling or anything like that. With the exception of the casting, which was which is phenomenal. But the fact that I remember seeing it and thinking, I can't see a damn thing in this picture because of how dark they're shooting it. Mm-hmm. It was like they were shooting in the middle of night. I couldn't see anything when they were in the ice caves and all that. Because of the way that the lighting was, it
Well, so that's another thing. I'm glad you brought that up because that's another thing that like Marvel has not only figured out a storytelling formula, they've figured out a visual formula. There's a certain visual style that almost all of their movies snap
that level of saturation, but it's like the precise level of it's not too much, it's not too little.
Right. There's a certain look, and Kevin Feige has said in the past that like they do that intentionally. I mean, obviously they do, but he said like they do it intentionally because they want the characters to feel like they all belong in the same universe. Like if you had Sam Raimi's Spider-Man meeting, Chris Nolan's Batman, it would feel really weird. And so they were like, let's make these a lot more, similar to one another, a lot more adjacent in style. And in Phase 1, they were still figuring out what that style was visually. And it
could have ended up a lot darker if you're looking at Iron Man 1, which there was a lot of grittiness in that film. I mean, it wasn't always gritty, but when you look at the colors of Avengers 1 going forward, they didn't have that level of saturation, that glossiness, those bright, sort of unrealistic colors in Iron Man 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really starts with Avengers, and that's where I think they really solidified the Marvel look, the Marvel tone in a big way. If it was birthed in Iron Man, it kind of came to maturation in Avengers.
I agree. And with that, I think we've had an introduction to the MCU, and we've talked about Phase 1, but I think we should probably get into Phase 2, which it's another one. There's 6 films in Phase 2, and it's another time where I think there's maybe 2 good ones. I mean maybe 3. So Phase 2 is made up of Iron Man 3, Thor: The Dark World, Captain America: Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers: Age of Ultron, and Ant-Man.
Yep.
So, Odie, you wanted to say something?
Oh, yeah. So, I know I'm probably going to get a decent amount of shit for this, as I usually do, but there is at least one movie I know you, TJ, and I can agree on within Phase 2, and that is Iron Man 3. I mean...
I liked Iron Man 3 a hell of a lot more than most people.
Yeah, I don't endorse the extremists in any way. I don't endorse the Mandarin, but that, like, soldier with PTSD storyline that kind of... reminds me of a movie like Thank You for Your Service or something, but whereas that's a generic soldier comes home and he's traumatized. This is a genuinely emotional...
Yeah.
You feel this one.
It was an interesting take, though, with the whole idea of Ben Kingsley playing a fake Mandarin. I think that it really humanized the story itself. It painted a realistic picture of the fact that hackers in our society are rampant, and that the thing that you believe to be true isn't always what it is.
Yeah, well, and I think the really big thing that can't be left out of any conversation about Iron Man 3 is the fact that this was the first movie. It was the first movie post-Avengers. So it was the first movie where a character's story and their world, their individual story and world, was impacted by the events of the other characters and other stories around them.
For sure.
Because Tony Stark is really grappling with the trauma of the Battle of New York and the things that he saw and the things that he went through. So that was like the first movie where Marvel kind of took the leap out and said, like, so how... Not how is our crossover affected by our characters, but how are our characters affected by our crossover?
And you know, that's a great point. And I think another important thing is that Iron Man 3 feels like the 2013 update of Iron Man 1, 2008.
Yeah.
I think that the themes, the character that they set up in Tony Stark comes out again. He's a human. He's so concerned with what's right, and he has such realistic emotions. He's not Superman. He's not a bulletproof, idealistic sort of... He's not Captain America. And I think that Iron Man 3 and Iron Man 1 both show that, and I think that's one of the things that's so great about it. And you don't see that so much in Iron Man 2, because Iron Man 2, to me, felt like it was just we have to put out another superhero movie, so, let's bank on the success of the first one. And I think that you're absolutely right. There's so much in Iron Man 3 that's important to consider.
You look at the dynamic with him and Pepper Potts, too, because that plays an integral role in the overall story about the struggling with your own personal trauma, but also dealing with the fact that your relationships are suffering because of all the shit that you were involved with in the previous film. And that echoes, throughout the course of Phase 2.
And you also get to see Pepper kick some ass.
Oh, for sure.
Some early female ass kicking in the MCU. I mean, Black Widow had obviously come before, but still.
She didn't have her own
Appreciation
solo
for
film,
rescue
though.
words
No.
too.
We also got to see Zero Suit Tony, which was pretty fun.
Oh yeah, just Tony with elements of his suit.
Ninja Tony.
Yeah.
Mark 42, easily one of the greatest suits in any Marvel movie so far. Fight me.
It was like pre-nanotech Iron Man, but like post having to have the whole suit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Iron Man 3 certainly was one of the highlights of Phase 2. And for me, I also look at how much of a switch Guardians of the Galaxy provided when it was first released. The very first one.
The second best film of Phase 2.
My first theatrical, and by all means, a life-changing movie for a lot of people, myself included.
Yeah, James Gunn certainly as captain of that ship.
And that movie made Chris Pratt the way that Iron Man made Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he became a movie star pretty much overnight.
Because people only knew Chris Pratt up until that point as Andy Dwyer from Parks and Rec. So for him to be considered an A-lister through that was certainly beneficial for his career.
Yeah.
No question
And
about
also
that.
like helped Michael Rooker's star rise because he was pretty much just like in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer back in the day, and he was on The Walking Dead. But like once he was in that movie, it was... And then especially in the second one when his character, goes even further, it was like, oh, Michael Rooker's awesome. And then you also have Dave Bautista's star on the rise beyond just the WWE.
Yeah.
Right.
Zoe Saldana too, who was known for Avatar, but became like really well, and also Star Trek, the reboot, but like also like being known on Guardians was huge.
I just want to point out that you guys did something just now
What's
where
up?
you talked about Iron Man 3. Well, we talked about Iron Man 3, and then you guys skipped Thor, The Dark World, and Captain America, Winter Soldier.
I mean, I feel like that's almost rightful in a way.
No, but like those movies, it's really interesting that those movies came back to back because Thor: The Dark World is like unwatchably bad.
Yeah.
It's so boring. It doesn't make any sense.
I never finished it.
And I finished it eventually, but I finished it in bits and parts because I kept fucking falling asleep. Like it's just not a great movie at all.
I actually had to do some Wikipedia research on the concept of the ether as an infinity stone because I didn't understand that tying into the rest of it.
Because they don't bother to explain it.
Well, yeah.
MacGuffins.
The only thing that I found in that film was that was a saving grace was seeing the dichotomy between Iron Man. What the hell am I talking about? Thor? Yeah, thank you. Thor
and Loki.
Thor and Loki, and that their relationship, they in fact do have a necessity for each other, and that they can actually work together as characters.
And Loki's sacrifice play that gets completely undone by Ragnarok.
Yeah. Basically.
He's not dead.
Yeah. And then he's going to be not dead again when he gets his own show.
I think Loki is dumb and is a dumb character, and I think Thor is an also dumb character.
But the Winter Soldier is fucking awesome.
He's
I'll
awesome.
fight you all day.
But
that movie is rad.
There is a person from my high school that I know, and I'm sure there are thousands of these people that love Thor: The Dark World, that love Winter Soldier, just because they will get on their knees in a second for Tom Hiddleston as Loki or for Sebastian Stan as the Winter Soldier.
Like most MCU fans, like generally, from my impression, has been that they like the Winter Soldier.
Oh yeah, I agree.
And I don't understand that by any means.
I think it's a really well told story. I think just as like a standalone story, it's an interesting and compelling story. I think the acting is great, and I think the dichotomy between Steve and Bucky is really great, and the way it calls back to their relationship in the first Captain America. And just that was a movie that, in juxtaposition to like Iron Man 3, like it did show like how his life and how S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything had been affected by prior events, but it also really went really deep within Cap's character, and it explored him living in this modern world, which was just barely touched on in Avengers.
I'll give you this. I think that Winter Soldier is the best of all of the Captain America movies.
For sure. Oh yeah.
By a large margin. And I don't think it's terrible. I just never liked it. I don't care for Captain America as a character.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to appreciate movies that are about Captain America.
Well, it was also the first Russo brothers Marvel movie too.
Yeah.
Who now like have the keys to the franchise.
Yeah, and I don't like their style at all.
Yeah.
The key part in that film for me that I really enjoyed was the Zola sequence when the two of them are in the bunker and they switch on the computer to look at the files, and it sort of illustrated the history of how deep Hydra's influence on the organization went. I thought that was a great tie-in to the film.
And Nick Fury's fake death.
Oh yeah,
which is actually really brilliantly done.
Oh yeah, I thought that was pretty great.
And not only that, but also looking at it from a historical perspective too, because the Winter Soldier also tied in a Soviet plot. And as a student of Russian history and of Russian culture, I looked
Cold
at
War and all
the
that.
Cold War. I'm fascinated with all of that history. A lot of the historical facts of that film and of that story held true, that they were always working on secret experiments, that there was always some backdoor dealings that were going on. So I was able to view it through that lens as well, and that certainly benefited my experience.
Yeah, definitely. And what about you, Zach? Any thoughts on Phase 2 films?
Well, I was just gonna say that. I mean, honestly, I never saw Thor: The Dark World.
You don't have to.
Yeah,
You're
Don't
good.
worry about
Pointless
it.
movie.
But see, here's the thing: is that, to be completely honest, I completely forgot that movie even existed.
Yeah.
Lucky.
And
Everybody did.
and for some reason, it's the same thing with, like, not so much the same thing with The Winter Soldier, because I went to go see The Winter Soldier in theaters. It's just that there's nothing about it that I can remember.
Guy has metal arm.
I don't blame
I'll
you,
give it
Zach. I
this,
feel
it
very
would-
similarly.
I'll give it this. It would make an amazing Tom Clancy movie, but it's not a fucking
go.
Tom Clancy movie.
Yeah.
I'd like it better if it was a Tom Clancy movie because then there wouldn't be Captain America in it.
So I think now we should probably shift gears to Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh,
Because
yes.
for-
For sure.
because
For sure.
Phase
You're-
2, it's
yeah.
certainly, it was, in itself, I mean, within Phase 2 in the MCU, in itself, it was,
Well, and I also consider that movie to be like almost a soft reboot on the Marvel formula.
Yeah.
Like it really like it cranked up not just like the literal color, but like the colorfulness of the world and the music.
And the campiness.
The campiness, yeah, and a lot of like the humor, which is sometimes kind of forced, but oftentimes
and
kind of forced.
oftentimes kind of bad. But
Yeah.
like
it's tongue-in-cheek.
It's
Yeah, but I mean, it's a great movie. But I think its effects are that it's that the movies that came after that movie were definitely, because that movie was so successful, and like these were characters that were unheard of. I mean, Iron Man and Captain America and Thor weren't like hugely beloved characters before those movies either, but like nobody had heard of, outside of like hardcore Marvel comic fans, who the hell's Peter Quill?
Star-Lord, yeah.
What's a Gamora? Who's Drax? Like, and then after that
Why
movie,
is Gamora?
why is exactly exactly, my friend. But that movie, for better or worse, it proved to Marvel that they could crank the fun factor up even more in their movies. And they could crank up the colorful factor, and it also gave them the confidence to venture out into the cosmic. Because we also have to talk about the fact that this was the first Marvel movie that was like very cosmic, and they get really into that in Infinity War, and they get really into that in Captain Marvel.
and they get really into that in pretty much every movie except every movie in Phase 3 for that matter, with the exception of Black Panther
Right.
and Spider-Man Homecoming. And Doctor
Yeah.
Strange, but like
yeah.
Yeah, well, Doctor Strange is kind of cosmic in a different way.
Yeah. Now, I will say that I think the most important effect of Guardians of the Galaxy on the rest of the MCU is that that's when they doubled down on the nostalgia factor.
Oh yeah,
It
that
seems
too.
like a definite tonal shift. Like, I can identify easily. It's like I said, Tom Clancy with Winter Soldier, but it seems to start there with Guardians. Like, not to compare it to an amazing piece of shit, but Guardians feels like a Flash Gordon movie in the same way that Homecoming is an 80s high school movie, or you've got Ant-Man, the classic Ocean's 11 style thing.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
there
I
are
think
heist elements to it,
Yeah.
I think those are elements. I would never go so far as to compare the movies as if they're like the same genre, but I do think that there are just like nods, and I think that that's another one of those. They realized how to market, how to double down on that nostalgia.
You give somebody something new sandwiched in something old that they love.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy for me personally was one of those films where like I saw the trailer for it, and knowing full well that it was a Marvel movie, I had no intentions of watching it.
Oh yeah.
It looked stupid.
I like you, Zach.
That's the best part.
But then again, it was like maybe like a year after it had come out, like on DVD and Blu-ray and all that. And one night, probably like 3 a.m, I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. Why not? So
I can't sleep.
So yeah, that's every night for me.
Well, Thor put me to sleep. Might as well watch this.
Yeah.
But so I torrented the movie.
You're such a bad person.
I know, I'm an asshole.
My opinion of you has dropped.
I don't give no fucks.
All right, fine.
That's valid.
My opinion of you goes right back up again.
All right. All right. But no, I watched the movie, and again, it was the same thing as Iron Man when I was a child. It was just kept me entertained through the whole thing. And as a wrestling fan, I mean, massive wrestling fan my whole life, to hear Batista was going to try his hand at acting, in knowing what he was like in the ring and when he cut promos, my first thought was, oh my God, why? You know, and to see what he did with the character, with Drax, and see how well he was able to...
Hot take, I think he's the best actor in that.
His comedic timing in that movie is on point. It's
And
so good.
You expect it to be shameful too, because when he came back, he was essentially promoting that at what would have been my second or third WrestleMania, and you think, oh shit, this is the kind of movie that he has to come back to promote.
Yeah.
But that's what made it better.
I didn't know much about Drax the character within the realm of Guardians of the Galaxy as the comic, because I didn't read those comics. So for me to get a visual representation of what are they going to do with this character, how is this character going to appeal to me, to take the one thing about having a literal interpretation of phrases and idioms, that the way that he does speaks volumes, and played to his advantage as the big muscular character who takes everything literally. I think back to I almost pissed myself laughing when they were in the prison, right? And they were I think it was Peter was talking about threatening the guy in order to get them out of the cell, and he made this motion, the finger on the throat motion.
Why would I drag my finger across her throat?
I remember thinking that's not that funny, but it's fucking
It's funny because it flows organically out of their characters, and that's like one of the great things about that movie that Marvel, I think, hasn't always replicated as great since then, is where they're like, oh, let's put this like juvenile humor in there, but if it doesn't come out of the character Ragnarok, then there's going to be problems, because like Thor isn't just going to be like, ew, Hulk, I didn't want to see your penis. Like, you know, like that's not coming organically out of his character, whereas with like Peter Quill, like he's a man-child. Like he was like, what, 9 or 10, and then was plucked off of Earth by these aliens, and so he really never matured past being like this kid. And Drax is, you know, it's goofy because he doesn't get people's humor, so he ends up being humorous in that way. And Gamora's like the straight man, and so, you know, it's
funny in that, like, I think that Drax's character is great, and the humor involving Drax is, for me, acceptable. I kind of get it. And part of that is I have a lot of sympathy for Drax, because I remember after Guardians of the Galaxy came out, I was reading this interview, and it was from a boy's mother, and this kid he had autism, and he said that when they walked out of that theater, he said, Drax is my favorite character, he's just like me. And I remember thinking about that and being like, wow, they really captured something amazing with that character. They were able to make a sort of progressive nod to people who have autism in a way that wasn't offensive and wasn't like exploitative. It was just natural, and I think his humor in that regard is really commendable. Now, at the same time, when I look at Peter Quill, I'm totally like, the whole juvenile humor thing doesn't appeal to me, because as a fan of science fiction, my thought is, if you were plucked off of Earth when you were 9, you wouldn't stay a man-child the rest of your life. You would become the most, like, traumatized, screwed up adult.
Well, you have to remember, too, that in his environment growing up, I mean, he was surrounded by Yondu and the Marauders, and their maturity level wasn't great either. So, I mean, as a victim of environment, there's not much room for growth.
Well, and then that's like one of the points that gets touched on in, you know, Guardians too, is that really Yondu is his real father.
Yeah.
And you have to consider the environment he was surrounded by before, because Chris Pratt seems to come off with everything that Peter Quill would have tried to be. He comes off as a Hasselhoff type, as a Harrison Ford type, which would have been amazing because he was also rumored for the initial casting in Solo. But
well, good for his career that he didn't get in that.
Yeah,
that's another really bad movie.
Yeah,
but
it's really pretty
another
movie,
discussion.
Though.
Yeah,
yeah, but Peter Quill is essentially a product of his environment on Terra as he is with Yondu and the Marauders, in a way.
Sure, I just don't buy it. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm not about it. And it's not compelling to me, which is the other thing, and that's I think just my taste.
So then in Phase 2, the final origin story is Ant-Man. The final origin story of Phase 2.
It's also the final film of Phase 2.
Yeah, well, because it came out, I think, after Ultron, but it was still considered.
But it was before Civil War, because Phase 2 started in 2016.
So, Ant-Man, I love both Ant-Man movies, but I will also be the first to admit that they're pretty average movies. They're not knocks out of the park. I think they're fun, and I'm there for the lot of the humor that's in those movies, and I've enjoyed them. I think they're colorful and exciting and everything. But yeah, that was a movie that was there.
Yeah.
I think Ant-Man's annoying.
Personal favorite of mine, but I'm not gonna immediately strike up to defend it. It's more about the tone.
Well, so that's like the two Ant-Man movies are like the two movies in the MCU where I always be like, I love those movies, but I won't defend them. Like, I can't defend them. I can't defend why I love them. I just do. You know,
the whole Yellow Jacket formulaic. Oh, we're gonna steal the formula so we can make money. I didn't really find that.
It's just a
compelling
MacGuffin.
either. Yeah,
Yeah,
They use that trope in so many flicks.
so I mean, it's a generic origin story movie, and it is a movie that plucked the exact storyline of Iron Man and that formula and was like, bring it over here.
We're just gonna put it in a different environment. But again, like everything else following that formula of classic MCU, they went really well. They did really well with the casting. Paul Rudd, I think, is a really compelling Ant-Man. I think that having
Hank Pym,
as Michael Douglas, and not focusing on Hank Pym as the character, because in the comic it was Hank Pym originally, but having him sort of be kind of an
elder statesman of the universe,
kind of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi to the Luke Skywalker, that type of a dynamic, right? Where you have somebody who's older, who's not necessarily in the limelight, but who's providing wisdom and guidance to the person who is in the suit.
Well, that's an important aspect of the hero's journey. When you look at Joseph Campbell's writing, I mean, you have to have that wise Gandalf figure. In an epic story.
It's extremely strong in that it takes what I feel is the classic, not only Marvel but comic book formula of the perfect foil. Just like you think about Iron Man and Ironmonger, Hulk and Abomination. An example I like to go to is the Flash and Reverse Flash, because that's literally the perfect foil. But they took that with Yellow Jacket and they made it more intimidating in a way, because Darren Cross is somebody you won't necessarily piss yourself at to begin with, but you will be intimidated whether you like it or not eventually.
Yeah, because he has a gun that can turn you into strawberry jam. So, that's scary. But, yeah, so, I mean, I guess unless anybody has anything more they want to say about Ant-Man, I think we could probably get into the first bad Avengers movie.
And I think we have to go through Age of Ultron and then Phase 3 relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Because we are starting to run kind of close on our time. But last thought on Ant-Man, I didn't think it was funny. All right. So Age of Ultron.
You happy to walk out on that one, mate?
Yeah, I'm happy to walk out on that one. I'm not even going to explain myself.
But a little train hits a little guy.
Yeah, okay.
I think that was more funny than the actual scene.
Oh, the Thomas the Tank Engine memes that came out of that, though, that had better traction than the initial film.
Fair enough.
But yes, Age of Ultron. Let's get into it.
That movie, I have to start because this is the movie that sets me up for how angry I am at the next Marvel movie that we're going to talk about after Age of Ultron. It sets up the trend one of the trends that makes me so angry, and that's that Iron Man, Tony Stark, is just wrong, and it makes me so mad. Makes me so mad. Age of Ultron, for those of you who have fortunately not seen it, is a movie about how Tony Stark, in an effort to save the world from ever having conflict again, invented a super AI robot that decided that humanity was humanity's biggest flaw.
His only fault is literally being too smart for his own good.
His only fault is that Ultron is right.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound smart at all.
Well, and it's awful because the whole Ultron thing, the computers, if they get smart enough, are just going to realize that humanity is the problem and kill all the humans. I mean, come on, guys.
We saw this in Ex Machina, people.
We saw this in The Terminator.
Yeah.
This is one of the oldest and most played out blasé science fiction tropes.
Yeah.
And it didn't, and it wasn't utilized well in this movie.
Interesting that they used Stark as the central character, though, because if we're talking in perspective to how close it was to the original comic, I mean, Hank Pym was actually the one who originally designed Ultron in the comic book. So to have it shift to Iron Man and Tony Stark and Dr. Banner actually too, because it was kind of Ultron was kind of a thing where it was Bruce and Tony.
They're setting up for Civil War, which is why they did that.
And these are also a lot of those retcons that the universe had to make because of characters that weren't available yet. We didn't have Spider-Man yet, and so when you go into Civil War, Spider-Man's like hardly an element, where he was like so pivotal to that story in the comics.
And the X-Men the same.
X-Men
I mean,
too,
that's also a problem with Civil War. And we could talk for hours and hours about Civil War. I think we have to skip Civil War in this podcast, or at least gloss over it. We can do a whole episode on Civil War, and I think we probably will at some point.
So we'll just combine the conversation because they're literally Avengers 2 and Avengers 2.5.
Yeah.
And like they're even back to back. Like it might as well have just been part 2, like Avengers 2 part 2. Like it's pretty much what Civil War is, because it continues off, like you said, Ben, with like Tony being wrong.
The Sokovia Accords and all that.
Yeah, the Sokovia Accords literally happened because Sokovia gets fucking leveled in this movie. And
it's Tony Stark's fault.
It's Tony Stark's fault. He's such a bad person. And then Thunderbolt Ross comes back. But like, yeah, so this movie, it has a lot of story problems. Both movies have a lot of story problems. But I think the one thing that Civil War gets more right than Age of Ultron is that Ben is going to disagree with me because he's Ben, but Civil War is at least visually interesting, where there's almost no visual interest to Age of Ultron. It's so poorly shot. It's like Joss Whedon's like Buffy era TV direction really comes through in a big bad way in this movie, and
I don't disagree with you at all.
It doesn't look great.
I think it speaks to how not intricate, but how massive the visuals are for Civil War, that looking back on the time where I had every single MCU movie on my computer, Civil War was about twice the size in terms of gigabytes of any other movie.
But it was also filled with
massive.
CG.
Well, yeah, and so that's the problem. So like, it has great cinematography in general compared to Age of Ultron, but it's not perfect in that department either. Like Ben and I have talked about ad nauseum, the airport scene is visually atrocious. Like you can pretty much see like the chroma key outline around Robert Downey Jr. Like,
and it's cluttered. It's every shot is just like there's too much.
I don't know. See, I'm gonna have to disagree. Coming from somebody that admittedly knows jack shit about the inner workings of film, I still thought visually it was
Civil War.
Yeah, it was visually, it wasn't like, mesmerizing or breathtaking, but it was still...
No, I think there was enough good cinematography in that, and I think they, for the most part, did a good job at telling the story visually, and the Russo brothers are really capable of making really visually interesting shots when they want to. There's so much forcing in of the VFX, and it's not always super effective. And this also was another movie where, like, that wasn't aided by the fact that then you get those really shoehorned in dumb jokes, like... Ben and I again have talked about ad nauseum. Peter Parker being like, "You guys ever seen that really old movie, The Empire Strikes Back?"
Well, it's just painful because
nostalgia. It's gone too far.
Yeah, and no kid is going to say something like that.
They're trying to make Spider-Man as 80s as possible because they want Ferris Bueller to have webs.
But he's supposed to be like a nerd.
No,
isn't Peter Parker like a geeky, nerdy kid? Like he would probably worship. He literally in Homecoming, he's literally making like a model of the Death Star.
Yeah,
and he's like, that really old movie, you guys ever heard of that? Like, he's clearly a Star Wars fan. I mean, I know he didn't set it up yet, and that movie is stupid. It's dumb.
They ruined that film. Civil War ruined the Zemo character for me too. As a comic book aficionado, he kind of made it sort of.
And I think you hadn't gotten here yet, but we were talking about that earlier, and me, Ben, and Odie were all saying that he was probably like the best part of that movie character-wise,
which is sad.
Yeah. Which is sad. Because I mostly agree with like
the fact that I confuse him enough with Arnim Zola should speak to how bad that really is.
Those characters could be used interchangeably, and also kind of they haphazardly threw in the fact that Black Panther makes his appearance, and they sort of glossed over that too.
He was just there to be another thing for Captain America to be angry about, which is dumb.
And then they also completely backpedal everything we know about Tony's character at the end for him to freak out and start fighting Bucky and Cap in the way that the Russo brothers will later on do again in Infinity War. I mean, I know obviously Marcus and McFeely are the screenwriters as well, but still, they bring that back with Peter Quill deciding to lose his shit and kill
act
everybody
in a way that's
by,
completely and totally uncharacteristic.
nothing to do with his character up to that point.
Tony Stark, the most rational and intelligent person on the planet.
You killed my mom.
And now I have to punch you, even though I know that you didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
Here, let me pull your ass out of this fight, Bucky, even though it's literally your job to pull me out of fights.
So that was the end of Phase 2, right? So
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Civil War was the
start of
start of Phase 3. So
And then after that,
time
we got
to move
Doctor
on
Strange.
to Ben being fanboy.
yeah, well, I mean, I love Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange was probably my favorite MC or Marvel hero outside of the X-Men or Spider-Man. I mean, I'm a huge fantasy nerd, and magic is like my thing when it comes to like aesthetics in movies and stuff. Like I'm a huge fan of that. And Doctor Strange is one of the first movies in the Marvel universe that it's not technology, it's magic, and I just loved that.
Yeah, the mysticism element is cool. What did you think of Chiwetel Ejiofor as Mordo and his portrayal of that character?
I mean, bleh.
Because at the end of the film, it kind of set him up like his character was gonna take off as Baron Mordo, and he was gonna
Yeah.
do his own thing. I don't know how that is gonna pan out in the series of the franchise, but Benedict Cumberbatch did a great
Oh yes,
job.
love me some benefit.
I feel like there are two actors in the world.
You actually like Bunky and Cucumber Patch?
All right, enough.
I love benefit cosmetics.
guys. I think that I do like Benedict Cumberbatch in general. I think that he is the only actor left on the planet who could have played Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange.
RDJ probably could have.
Were they going to
If he was
cast
never
somebody else?
Iron Man, he probably
That's
could have
what
been
I'm
Doctor
saying.
Strange.
He was the only.
I mean,
that's
if
what I
they can do
mean.
Sherlock equally, they can do Doctor Strange equally. Fuck it,
They're
give the guy
literally
Kate.
they're on equal tier at the same kind of role, but Benedict Cumberbatch has a better voice. So
Were they going to cast somebody else, or did they always have him in mind? Because I actually don't know the story
I
behind
just
that.
really wish that they were going to cast Joaquin Phoenix. He was in talks for a while,
God.
and then they moved over to Benedict. But I just still really wish that he just kept his British accent.
Yeah, I
I think
agree.
it would have worked so much better for that
agree.
character anyway.
he spat at an American accent.
Yeah.
As long
can't
as he
do it.
keeps penguins out of it, he should have been fine.
Will, your American accent is significantly better than Benedict Cumberbatch's.
Yeah, well, mine sort of comes in interchangeably. I think the issue that I would have in playing any character who is either traditionally British or traditionally American is my issue is it goes in and out completely in my subconscious.
Yeah, but you're not a multi-million paid actor,
Right, yeah.
carrying a
Yet.
franchise
Yet.
Right,
So maybe
right.
you can hone that in.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Marvel isn't handing you like truckloads of money.
You're right. I really like Doctor Strange too. The whole Dormammu dynamic.
Dormammu.
I really-
come to bargain.
Yeah, the whole sequence in the endless time loop. I absolutely loved that.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that they brought those Inception aesthetics.
Yeah, that was great.
Very
too.
Nolan.
The whole thing with even the humor that was very subtle, like when he was in the library and while Wu was listening to Lady Gaga, he was pulling the different books off.
Oh
the
yeah, I
shelf.
think it was Beyonce, right? Because
Yeah.
that was like the joke.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then the whole thing of the Eye of
cape is
Agamotto
hilarious.
and tying in the time stone into the
Yeah.
Eye of Agamotto relic too. I think it was just a really good film.
One of my all-time favorite sequences in any Marvel movie is that scene toward the end when the environment's going in reverse and
yeah.
he's going in normal time.
Yeah,
it's
that was
just so visually stunning.
Great
and
sequence.
so interesting and must have been so hard to do and do as well as they did it.
Tilda Swinton too as her character.
She's amazing in everything.
And
literally
she
everything
is.
she's in.
Tilda Swinton is one of the best actresses or actors in general. Period.
Her and
hands down.
Her and Snowpiercer. Oh my goodness.
Snowpiercer.
Dude,
oh my
her
god.
and
Wait. That's a
Suspiria.
different.
She
Her and
plays
Suspiria.
three
She plays
different
three
people.
characters. Oh my god. Guys, if you haven't listened to our Suspiria cast, you should go back and listen to it. Watch the movie and listen to our cast.
Plug.
Plug.
We'll talk about some more.
Let's get full on shameless here.
But Tilda Swinton's character was great.
And we do have to keep going.
Yes,
so I'm
yes,
going to
yes.
move us on. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
I loved
perfect
it.
80s sequel. It's that
It's bad.
I can't remember.
Yeah, perfect 80s sequel in that it's bad.
I can't remember who it was that said it, but it's an 80s sequel in that let's do the first movie,
Well,
but
also,
more.
It is the first time that Marvel proved to themselves that they could do de-aging really well. Because Kurt Russell's de-aging, the beginning of that movie, is
Yeah, they did a good
beautiful.
job.
It looked like
so
it's
It's not Logan and Logan.
It looked
I'll
like
give you
they
that.
pulled him straight out of the set of Overboard. That was how perfect.
Yeah,
Well,
they did a good
Ben
job.
and I are both huge fans of Tron Legacy, despite
Yeah.
that movie not being like
God.
loved by a lot of people. And Jeff Bridges is
an
like
important
de-aging, and
movie,
that is
okay?
so wooden and uncanny
But it was like the
valley.
first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, back then, seeing it in the theaters, it looked realistic. Of course, now you can obviously tell.
Yeah.
Well, Tron Legacy also did that whole thing where like it was the crimes were hidden by the fact that the whole world was CG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a different podcast.
Yeah, really
no.
like Guardians 2. The one thing that I really enjoyed was the comedy, obviously, and the soundtrack. We can talk too about how the soundtrack for the Guardians films is just phenomenal. But there were some great bits with the whole thing about dealing with Groot growing up and his journey from being really, really small at the end of the first Guardians film to being almost an adolescent, kid.
And I think Guardians 2 is much easier to appreciate when you think of it as Yondu's story.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's a big Yondu redemption
Mary
arc.
Poppins, y'all.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
comes so like it goes.
That was
so
the best scene in
so
that
full
whole
circle.
movie.
Yeah,
He's the coolest.
Well, and every scene in that film that Yondu wasn't in was bad, and every scene that he was in was good.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which overall leads to a movie that is not great, but isn't. I mean, could have been a lot worse. I don't
mean,
know.
I will never say that the movie has like an amazing story because it has no story. It has no plot. It goes nowhere. It does nothing.
Yeah.
Other than just Yondu's redemption, basically, and like Groot, maturing.
Right.
But I think it is a testament to how interesting those characters are. That like
Yeah.
it's literally just it's a 2+ hour movie that I went to go see twice because I enjoyed it so much. Maybe I'm just a Marvel shill, but whatever.
No. It's fine. The Nebula dynamic too. I think was interesting.
Oh, the sister dynamic with Nebula and Gamora is also awesome, and that awesome scene where they're facing off and everything. But it's a testament to how interesting those characters are. That they can just hang out for 2 hours, and most of us are like, I'm here for it. It's fun. It's engaging.
Could have been worse.
It could have definitely been worse.
It's a team of utility players to begin with. I mean, you have a guy that like Michael Rooker that he can make himself shitting his pants in Mallrats, or he was buried in the background in Tombstone, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with.
Yes.
But yeah, you have a team of people that can play any position in a movie, that can play any kind of role, and do this one with there is no level of success higher than Guardians 2 in terms of making shit great.
Yeah.
And when also like Sylvester Stallone coming in like clutch with that cameo.
Show up and
Yeah.
be useless for a couple
Yeah.
That's funny.
So what's the next one after
Next
that?
next
Oh,
one
the
up
next
is
one.
Spider-Man:
Homecoming.
Homecoming,
Oh,
one of
yeah.
my favorites.
Absolutely.
I can't really speak much about that one because I actually didn't see it in theaters.
I actually have one issue with this movie. Okay. With Michael Keaton's character selling this alien technology to, what was it, just common criminals.
Yeah, but what's the problem with Batman being evil now?
I don't understand that.
Because he's Michael Keaton.
Keaton played Batman.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
That
Okay.
was the single greatest part of that.
But
for me,
right,
like-
he was selling like illegal like alien technologies to Childish Gambino and all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Donald Glover, gotta love him.
Here's the thing. That it made no fucking sense whatsoever. How are people going to go out into the woods near a fucking city like New York and shoot off alien technology into the sky? No cops are called?
Well,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
also the MCU where like there are
Yeah.
superheroes and clearly the police are underfunded.
Any
and,
superhero
No,
movie,
they're
the
also
cops
probably
are gonna
like
be useless.
Oh, it's just Tony Stark doing Tony Stark shit again.
If
Don't worry about it.
If anything, somebody probably called the police, and the police were like, "That's out of our jurisdiction," and then called Shield, and then Nick Fury was like, "This is like not important enough for me."
Yeah.
I mean,
or he called Tony and was like, "Get your boy under control."
it's New York. It's Chitauri Tech. It's like somebody walks around Sokovia and kicks around an Ultron head. Oh shit, that's still lying there. We better deal with
These are a
that.
lot of those elements you could say all the time, though. It's like where the hell was, like why didn't Nick Fury call Captain Marvel when the Battle of New York, or like why didn't this character show up to that thing? Like it's always like, oh, don't worry about it. Just
speaking
don't worry about
specific,
it.
and I don't mean to cut you off, but
No, you're
speaking
fine.
specifically about Spider-Man: Homecoming and the character of Peter Parker in general, because I really enjoyed Tom Holland's realism with that character. What the biggest thing for me that I just couldn't understand, and it's probably going to carry into Far From Home too, is why his friends need to be in on the secret of him being Spider-Man.
Because that's Spider-Man. That's like how it is.
But in the comics, being loyal, he doesn't tell his friends that he is. I mean, Harry obviously discovers later when he's New Goblin, but outside of that, and then Mary Jane discovering after the two have been dating for a while, it makes no sense with his development as Peter Parker.
I mean, in a lot of the tellings, Harry finds out quite a lot sooner than that, and becomes kind of similar when Ned is. And I think what it was first of all, I think they were just trying to really differentiate themselves from the prior films. Because Amazing Spider-Man really just copycatted the Raimi verse in a lot of ways, and I think they're trying to
But that did
stop that trend. And they also swapped out characters in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like it was like, oh, we're not even going to have Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy. We're gonna have a whole different love interest.
Well, there is MJ. She's
there
in
is
the
an
movie.
MJ, but it's still different. And we're gonna have Ned, because like nobody's ever paid attention to Ned in any movies, and he is a pretty big character in the original comics. Like that's a close friend of Peter's. And so I think they were just
who I'm pretty
trying
sure
to make it
in the comics knows that he's Spider-Man, right? I mean, that's
pretty early on.
Yeah. Right. So I think and I also think that it's important because this Tom Holland Spider-Man is a young Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And every cinematic Spider-Man we've seen thus far has been
a 30-year-old dude.
Yeah.
He does not look like a high schooler at all.
Maguire could play the teenager. Like aesthetically, he could look like the teenager. Not so much for the superhero, but again.
Well, the Andrew Garfield was just way too hot.
Yeah.
He was just
and Tobey Maguire wasn't a teenager. He was like a college kid.
Yeah.
Although
and that was an important aspect of
although,
that generation.
and I'm not gonna beat my nostalgia meat anymore with the Raimi trilogy.
Save the meat beating for when we all blow
That's the
RDJ
ultimate
after
Marvel
this.
quote. Can we put that on a poster for a Marvel movie? Beat your nostalgia meat.
Yeah, well,
Guardians 3.
Yeah, whatever.
Your nostalgia
gotta
beat
make
with
it
your
happen.
Goomba
You
some
can-
shot.
Yeah, you can copyright that for me if you want. But in staying true to the material, which I am kind of passionate about, because I think it's great that film can take a story and take some liberties with it. But there are some things in the story that need to stay, and one of them, for me personally, is the idea of having Peter's maternal or paternal figure be elderly. Aunt May has to be elderly for that dynamic to work.
Well, and I think a lot of it, again, was just trying to differentiate. I agree with you. I definitely don't think you're wrong by any means, but I think it was just trying to differentiate, and also it's another reason to bring Tony into his world.
And
quite frankly.
ex-Tony.
Yeah, and then like also, I actually really like the fact that they don't have the whole Uncle Ben dying again, because it's kind of like it's exactly like Bruce Wayne's parents dying. We've seen that way too many times, and we get it. With great power comes great responsibility. We know. And so like I think a lot of those elements being left out, and us just trusting us, like we know Spider-Man's origin, and we know his story, and we know his world. Here is him already kind of a little ways in being Spider-Man, a kind of different telling of his story, but that fits really well into the style of our world. I think is a big part of why this movie is so effective.
I agree.
And I think a lot of those little adjustments had to just be made.
All right, now we have to move on. We are running out of time.
You're
are already
gonna love
over.
this one, aren't you, Ben?
I hate Thor Ragnarok. I'll tell anybody as many times as I can. I think that movie is bad. I think the humor is bad. I think it's occasionally aesthetically pleasing, but more often than not, I think it's stupid.
I enjoyed it.
Well, I think somebody took a Guardians of the Galaxy veneer and then just tried to like
Apply Thor to
smear
it?
it over
Yeah.
Thor.
Yeah.
It's definitely a solid movie.
Gay Twitter
No.
as far
filed
as
for
I
that.
go. But it's by no means a Thor movie, because as much as I hated having to sit through that 4.5-hour fucking Hamlet movie in high school, Kenneth Branagh makes fucking Shakespeare, and that's what belongs with Thor.
It was
at
good
least
to
for a little.
It was good to see Stanley's last cameo though in Ragnarok. Yeah, because I believe that was
It's not his
No,
last
it's not his
cameo.
last.
No,
It's
no,
not his
no.
last
Oh,
at
right,
all.
he
Black
did-
Panther
did
and
some
Infinity War.
yeah, he did
He's
some
in Infinity War.
Right.
He's in Captain Marvel.
He's also
dropping
in
a nice
Captain
Kevin
Marvel,
Smith.
and then he's going to be in Endgame, and that's going to be the final one.
So they did pre-shoot with him
Yeah.
before he
Yeah.
passed. Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
See, the thing for me
Rip.
with Ragnarok is that I had heard from other people about their experience watching it. So I kind of went into it knowing full well this is not going to be, mainly action packed. It's,
Well, it's fairly action
Oh,
packed.
tons of action.
It does,
Yeah.
it does have action.
Thor.
I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I'm saying
It's extremely 80s for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, and there's a lot of
80s.
dumb
It's heavy metal, but slightly gayer.
I like that.
That's a good way to look at it.
Well, gay Twitter did go crazy for
Yeah,
Ragnarok.
it Ragnaroked, bro.
Yeah,
but,
Two gods chilling in a hot tub.
easy.
10 feet apart because they're not gay.
Big green Hulk dick.
Or 5 feet apart. Anyway, yeah, big green Hulk dick.
But yeah,
Dumb.
that was one of the things is that I went into it knowing full well, okay, there's going to be a good amount of focus on humor here. But I think, I don't know, going into it with that mentality, it kind of helped me enjoy it a lot more.
I liked it because I hated the first two Thor movies so much that it was refreshing just to
Yeah.
see a good Thor movie or a passable Thor movie or a remotely entertaining Thor movie. Ben, can you at least agree with
I'll
me
give it a
there?
remotely
Thanks,
One was
buddy.
all right, but
Valkyries-
you can't sit through Dark
Aye,
World.
the Valkyrie sequence that was beautifully shot.
Oh yeah,
Even
yeah.
though it was
I forgot about that.
Also, she's great.
yeah.
What's the actress's
Tessa
name?
Thompson.
Tessa Thompson is
Yeah.
awesome in that movie.
You know what? I'll agree with you guys on that one. I do think that her character was pretty interesting, and she was a good actress in that film.
The one thing I
Matt Damon's cameo.
I always
cameo?
forget.
Matt Damon.
Oh yeah, it's
And
so
the other
weird.
Hemsworth nobody gives a fuck about.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Liam
poor
was also
guy.
in the film.
Liam.
Wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing I kind of hated out of that movie, though, was actually not anything having to do with the Hulk. It was the fact that they're in this action sequence in the sky, flying, and they're talking about orgies.
Orgies in the spaceship. I was just
Yeah.
gonna
What
say
the
that.
hell?
It's dumb humor.
It's
And
heavy
Jeff
metal, but
Goldblum.
gayer, I'm
When,
telling you.
Jeff Goldblum.
That was another thing.
Jeff
I hated.
Goldblum is a god, but he didn't deserve to be in that movie. Or
Nope.
Makes
That
his
movie
He
didn't deserve him.
absolutely deserved
Yeah,
to be in.
right, that
He's
movie
the
didn't
only
deserve
one
him.
that can pull off the Grandmaster.
When Mark
No,
Mark
the Grandmaster
Ruffalo-
shouldn't have even existed.
I mean, he was basically just in that movie to play Jeff Goldblum.
And can we also say that
Yeah.
pretty much everyone who escapes on that ship at the end dies in the beginning of Infinity War.
Everybody.
And so
Yeah,
that movie has like almost no consequence. He saves everybody, but then they
Nothing
all
that
get
happens-
decimated in Infinity War.
not a single thing that happens in Ragnarok has any consequence.
Except the fact that Thor, like everybody that Thor loves, dies.
And Stormbreaker.
Kind of. Well, no,
Carl Urban-
Stormbreaker is pointless.
Carl
and
Urban had a
Thor's
redeeming end
Thor's
there.
losing his eye is
Yeah, oh,
pointless, and it's all stupid and makes no. It has no impact on the
Thor
overall
losing his
story.
eye basically serves as a long-winded setup for another fucking rocket. trip.
Yeah, it's a joke for Rocket.
Yeah, that's it.
was-
That's all it was.
It was kind of cool though to see the whole dynamic of him, that struggle of him and his hammer and being reliant on his hammer too. I think that was an interesting thing to explore.
So pushing past Thor Ragnarok though, because I know Ben's getting
Yeah.
antsy back there.
We're
Black
out of time.
Panther, the first Oscar award winner, 3-time Oscar award winner,
and it deserved it.
by the
Hell
MCU,
yeah.
and it deserved every
Hell yeah.
accolade it got, and all the ones it didn't.
It's my number one film in all of the MCU by a large margin.
It's a masterpiece, and it was like one of the first Marvel movies I didn't go to see like opening weekend, and I kind of waited and sat on like the opinions, and everything was coming out was so overwhelmingly positive that I was like, first of all, I regret not seeing this immediately, and secondly, like I have to go see this. Like this just looks amazing, and then I was blown away by it. It's
Michael
incredible.
B. Jordan, Killmonger.
Yeah.
Michael
yeah.
B. Jordan
That's
is so
the
hot.
Best
Comparable.
villain in the entire MCU.
One of the
thus
most
far.
relatable
Agreed.
by far.
Yeah.
So I also got delayed for a while. Only went to see it the night I got accepted to St. Rose. So already high spirits, and I didn't think anything could drag it further. But definitely I'm not going to include it within my favorites anytime soon. But you
Boo.
can't deny that it's a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah,
Who played
it is.
Chadwick Boseman's sister in that? Because I liked her character a lot. His
Yeah,
sister,
she
who,
was a great
who
character.
designed
I
who
don't
designed all the
remember.
weaponry.
And
Terrible
Tony
with
Stark
names.
dies, she's going to be Ironheart. Watch.
Oh my god, I hope
That
so.
is the
so
best
much.
fucking idea
Oh.
I've heard yet.
Yeah, TJ, I think you and I were talking about this
Yes,
like
we
months
were.
ago, and I'm
And-
so in agreement with you on that. I think that would be amazing. I'm also, actually, we could talk about this in our next episode. So I'm going to save what I was just my little tidbit
Letitia
that I was
Wright,
just gonna
that's
make
her
up.
name. Thank
Yeah, she was great.
But anyway, we could gush about Black Panther all night. There's a lot that could be said about it.
And
but
Ben
we
and I
don't
have gushed
time.
about Black Panther on previous episodes
Yeah,
anyway,
that's true.
so it would
That's
kind of be a
true.
rehab.
So I think
Great
we're going to
film,
go
great
on to Infinity War, which is the last film in our list.
yeah, there's also Ant-Man and the Wasp,
Oh,
but
that's
it's
right, I
basically
forgot
just
about that.
Ant-Man 1 again.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. That's all it really is.
Let's
we
make
don't
some
have to talk
shit
about
tiny
Ant-Man,
part
yeah,
two.
it's essentially Ant-Man in the same timeline as Infinity War. It takes place simultaneously
Yeah.
to
I
Infinity
think
War.
it's going to end up being fairly integral to Endgame.
Yeah,
but,
probably.
just to go off the
Quantum Realm
trailers.
seems
Yeah, with
to
the
be the
Quantum
name of the
Realm.
game.
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, and there's a post-credit scene at the end of Ant-Man and Wasp where, because it takes place right before Infinity War, and so there's the scene where they're like trying to get into the quantum realm because they figured out how to, like, Ant-Man's figured out how to get in and get back, and then he goes down, and then he's like, guys, can you pull me out of the quantum realm? And then you look up to like the full-size world and they vanish.
Yeah, they turn
and so you're
into
like,
dust.
oh, so that's going to be something in Infinity War we're going to have to figure out, not Infinity War, Endgame, how
Also,
he got out of the quantum realm.
This is our
Yeah.
5-minute warning, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, 5. Talking about Infinity War, because now we're there.
Infinity War. I love it. Ben hates it.
I think it's
Done.
awful.
One of the most emotional experiences I've ever had with a movie ever, but it's definitely more about the way you watch it than the movie itself.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see, because like I watched that and I had no reason to have any emotion for any of the characters in that film at any given point. And other than frustration, I think that was the
I don't
only
feel
emotion.
so good, Mr. Stark.
Yeah, and
don't
like
hit me in
everybody
the
was
balls
all
again,
like,
TJ.
everybody was all like emotional about that. I'm like, who cares? He's coming back. He has
Yeah.
another movie.
No, that's
Like,
true. The movie has no consequence whatsoever at all.
Yeah.
It literally
None.
there's a
Zero.
line where Stephen Strange says there's only one reality where we win, and then like right before he dies he says it had to be this way, and it's like that's just they literally smacked you in the face with that. There is no consequence. They're gonna win. It does not matter. Like,
There may be consequence, but there's consequence for 2 or 3 fucking
But
people
I can also
after
say, like,
Endgame's over.
I think Infinity War is the pinnacle of Marvel's visual effects in just
Sure.
Thanos alone.
yeah, it was
Like,
Oh,
he
yeah.
is so convincing.
and the
There's
final
not a
battle-
single shot in that movie where I don't believe him
Then he went on to
100%
play
as a
Cable.
person.
like, what do you
Yeah,
mean?
Josh
battle
Brolin had
that
a
it-
big
yeah.
2018, man.
Yeah.
TJ, what do you mean by that? Because I think that his character is the most unbelievable.
Oh,
in
no,
that
I meant
film.
visually, man.
Visually,
I meant,
okay.
like, visually, like, he
Yeah.
looks like a person that exists in that world with them.
Even though he's
like,
CG.
Yeah, like, he looks like makeup. Like, he doesn't
Yeah,
look like
I
CG.
agree.
They do it so well.
I think
so well.
I think I'm inclined to agree with you. In any film that I've seen thus far, I think he's the best biological creature or figure, the most realistic biological entity.
that
to date.
final fight, that attack on Titan, if you will, Weebs,
Oh,
is
God.
probably one of the most visually stunning things, not only
And
in a Marvel
frustrating.
movie.
and frustrating because
But-
cut off his fucking arm.
Yeah,
And
Just shoot
also
Quill in
Peter
the
Quill,
fucking
what
face
the
and
hell?
move on.
They
Peter
really-
Quill
but
acting
they
totally
pulled
opposite
a
his
fucking-
Not
character.
only one of the
Civil
most
War.
visually striking scenes in a Marvel movie, but in recent memory, as far as I go, one of the most visually striking scenes in any movie.
Nah, bullshit.
I was trying-
not even close.
I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out in that film and watching it the whole thing of obtaining the Soul Stone and how Red Skull and Hugo Weaving being teleported with when
Yeah.
to
Well, it's actually not even Hugo Weaving. It's
That's
a different
the best
actor.
part.
Is it really?
Yeah, they recast them for
Yeah.
Infinity War.
I
They
didn't know-
Not a
completely
big deal,
wasted
but
it.
yeah.
but I was trying to figure out how Red Skull transporting to that environment to be I guess the protector of the Soul Stone or the
Yeah.
guardian
I
of
took
that.
it as he was like almost in purgatory or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I think the thing that I really liked most about this movie, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to move along quickly.
No,
because I know
I
we're running
get
out of time.
it, yeah.
The biggest thing that I think I will come away with this movie and say, like, I've watched it like probably 5-6 times now, because it has a lot of story problems. There's a lot of shit that doesn't make sense. It doesn't have any consequence. Thanos is a really weird and inconsistent character, and you could go on all day about all the problems. But I think this was the first movie since the first Avengers movie that gave me that same excitement to see people together again, and because just to see, like, especially like to see the Guardians interacting with, Iron Man and with Spider-Man and like
yeah.
that's really represented in that initial scene on Titan when they're all like interacting with each other, and
then on Wakanda too with the different
yeah, and that whole
Any
whole
excuse to see
fight
Wakanda
in
again is
Wakanda
good.
is awesome
for sure.
Yeah, and like especially when they yell like Wakanda forever and all that, and it's like, oh man, like 'cause it feels like such a, like, you
Very
just saw
Lord of-
Black Panther,
very
you're like,
Lord of the
oh,
Rings
yes.
with the battles. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god, yeah, that was I was thinking that too, Will, when I
scene-
watched that.
I was like Lord of the Rings for sure with the way that they were
yeah.
coming around with the flanking
Well,
and
when
everything.
Thor comes down too with Rocket, it's like it was one of the most epic moments for me. It was like,
For sure.
oh my god, yes, I'm
sure.
It's
so
like
excited.
for me,
And at the
not since like stuff like Star Wars or
Yeah.
anything like, or like the Harry Potter movies. So far, those have been the only two series that I sit there after I'm done with one, and I'm like, okay, when's the next one
Yeah,
coming
well,
out?
this felt like an event movie in the way that the first Avengers did, and no movie
Yeah.
I think since did.
Exactly, and then when this one finished over in the theaters, not since those two series have I been this excited to see the next one that comes out.
Yeah.
There's a lot to look
It's
forward
really
to.
funny. I'm not excited. Like Endgame's going to come out,
Really?
and I'm going to be I'm going to read the reviews, and it's going to be people are going to be like, it's amazing, I love it, and then the critics
What,
are
so
going to
you
be
don't
like,
want to
it's-
join us when I suck Robert Downey Jr.'s cock after it?
oh my god,
How much
dude,
is he paying you?
dude?
Fuck it, I'll do it for free.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway,
We have
Jesus Christ.
because what?
wow, so totally derailed from what
Moving
I was
on.
going to say.
So I mean, because we have what? We have Captain Marvel is out right now. Endgame is the next one, and then after Endgame is Far From Home.
Far
Which
From
in the
Home.
timeline, from what I understand, immediately follows
Yeah.
Endgame. And I cannot.
Which is
tell you-
another reason why you know there's no consequence.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, even from a casting,
He seems to
perspective,
feel
and from
pretty
a-
good, Mr. Stark.
As a as a comic book fan, I cannot tell you how excited I am to see Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. It has been
love
my
Jake
dream.
yeah.
Gyllenhaal. We talked in our
Mysterio
last
is-
episode about Jake
Mysterio
Mysterio
Gyllenhaal.
is
did.
my favorite Spider-Man villain. It's just, and I actually have a Mysterio action figure, and finally see him being represented visually on film with someone like Jake Gyllenhaal portraying him. I am very interested to see how that.
I'm waiting
plays
for
out.
all the fishbowl jokes.
Oh yeah, there's gonna be a few.
Trust me, they're already
There's
coming.
going to be a few, but still, a lot to look forward to in the next coming months.
Yes, yes. And so with all of that said, guys, that wraps up our Marvel-Mania Roundtable. Guys, give yourself a good old round of applause. Not too loud. Plosives. Okay.
All right. We'll see you guys.
Yes, we'll
on
see you guys for part
Friday.
2 on Friday, where we'll be talking about Captain Marvel. So until then, this has been TJ, and
Ben.
Odie.
Will.
Zach.
peace out, fellas and ladies.